Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it centers on one of the most advanced and frankly unsettling psychological theories to emerge recently. It's called the NPC protocol, and it provides this profound diagnosis of modern life, suggesting that our highly optimized, automated society has, well, it's created what the theory terms an epidemic of sleepwalking.
It's an undeniably rigorous analysis of mass behavioral patterns in the 21st century. The source material is compelling, especially in its observations of human passivity. But the core issue we have to wrestle with today is the interpretation of that data, the framework itself.
Absolutely. So the central and I think provocative question is this: does the evidence, and it draws from biology, neuroscience, social dynamics, does it suggest that genuine human agency, what the theory calls libre albedrío, or free will, has been largely extinguished by modern convenience? That it's effectively reduced, 99% of the population to biological robots operating on a pre-recorded script.
Right. And I'm here to represent the position that, while yes, the described behavioral patterns are disturbingly accurate, most people are operating on autopilot, classifying this as a complete absence of agency, labeling 99% of humanity as NPCs, is an overly deterministic and I think a misleading framework. It just fails to account for latent human capacity.
And I'll argue that the evidence provided by the protocol makes that deterministic claim both necessary and quite urgent.
And I will argue that intellectual precision, it demands we distinguish between a deep, systemic inertia and the outright extinction of the self.
So, the core thesis is stark. It suggests that most decisions we assume are acts of free will are in fact just algorithmic reactions. And this isn't based on some abstract philosophy. It's rooted in biological economy. The scientific justification is the brain's, its overwhelming preference for operating under the default mode network, the DMN. The DMN is essentially the brain running on low-power mode. And why? To conserve glucose. The brain is our most expensive organ, metabolically speaking, and it's optimized for efficiency above all else. And this efficiency compels us to choose repetition, even if that repetition is painful or limiting, over the massive energy cost of true uncertainty and intentional change.
Okay, that's a crucial point, but I would frame it very differently. The DMN is certainly the brain's baseline. Yes, it handles routine maintenance, but does utilizing the baseline automatically equate to the permanent extinction of the player, the self that's capable of conscious direction?
I believe it does, because modern society has perfected what the protocol calls the 3 pillars of the invisible prison. By optimizing comfort, the need to engage higher cognitive functions, to really think, it gets deactivated. Consider the pillar of mimetic desire, your choices, your career, your car, the goals you pursue. They're just imitations of a social model, dictated by a mediator. They are not genuine elections. And the illusion of free will is so pervasive because you think you chose the script, but you were just handed it. So the protocol concludes that until a pattern is consciously broken, you are locked in a deterministic state, a biological robot.
I absolutely acknowledge the strength of the evidence here, particularly about the brain as a prediction machine and the ubiquity of these repetitive behavioral patterns. We agree that most human activity is automated and it's highly vulnerable to external programming through the cheap dopamine loop, the constant selling of anxiety and relief through passive consumption.
But you don't accept the classification?
I do not accept the definitive claim that this constitutes a complete and total lack of agency, the NPC classification. The material accurately describes a powerful state of high biological efficiency, yes, but I question whether optimizing for energy necessarily equals the total absence of a fundamental capacity for self-direction. Look, my concern is intellectual precision. This state of passivity, while profound, is a state of vulnerability to programming, not necessarily total, immutable pre-programming for 99% of us. If agency is just latent, hidden but recoverable, then the label NPC is misleadingly final.
Okay, let's drill down on that biological trap, because the protocol uses it as its foundational proof. The source makes this powerful claim that the zone of comfort is a tomb. And this isn't just a metaphor. The theory observes that the brain uses our ancient primal fear mechanism, the one designed to protect us from, lions, to protect us from modern psychological growth. Things like starting a business, public speaking, any novel, high-stakes endeavor.
The brain misfires, certainly. It treats growth like a predator.
Exactly. This fundamentally broken alarm system, it confirms the lack of autonomous direction. We are trapped by a faulty, easily exploited biology that prioritizes glucose conservation over existential fulfillment. If our own mechanism for self-preservation actively prevents genuine action, how can we possibly claim agency remains intact? The scriptures writes itself based on the path of least resistance.
That is a compelling argument for widespread inertia, I'll grant you. But let's go back to the core function. The brain's role is predictive and energy-saving. So if the brain must repeat known patterns to survive, then isn't the concept of NPC just a dramatic label for high biological efficiency? If the system is flawed for modern life, it's still just functioning as it was designed to evolutionarily. Where is the substantial evidence that the choice to break patterns, even unconsciously, never occurs without some huge conscious intervention?
The evidence is in the self-reinforcing social context. That's the second critical layer here. The material explicitly claims if your 5 closest friends are NPCs who only consume and not create, it is mathematically impossible to awaken. This points to a contagious lack of agency. If you are surrounded by people whose DMNs are just operating the script, their mediocrity becomes a gravitational field and it locks you in.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's mathematically impossible. I mean, let me tell you why. That claim, it fundamentally discounts the role of a random encounter or serendipity. If we are machines, we are probabilistic machines. Even in the most deeply ingrained routine, a low-frequency event, a book left on a bus, a brief conversation, that can trigger a cognitive dissonance that forces the DMN to yield. The claim of mathematical impossibility feels overly rigid.
But the protocol argues that those low-frequency events, they only register if the person is already seeking friction. If you're asleep, that noise just gets filtered out as background hum. The social consensus reinforces the DMN's preference for comfort, making those moments statistically negligible unless action is forced.
Okay, let's follow that logic through to mimetic desire. If we accept the idea that the desire for my entire life path is just an imitation of a social model, meaning I don't really want the corner office, I just want what the mediator taught me to want, how does the theory account for the initial spark of deviation, the genuine, authentic preference that leads some, however few, to the player state in the first place? If it's all imitation, where does genuine creation even begin?
I see why you'd ask that. But let me offer a different perspective, based on the material's framework. Mimetic desire ensures you're pursuing goals dictated by a mediator, a social model, not your authentic self. The whole system trains the brain for passivity through these cheap dopamine loops that just dull the sensation of genuine self-direction. So the only mechanism that's powerful enough to override that programming is pain.
Pain.
Yes, the source states that psychological friction, that profound realization that the script you were handed is fundamentally inadequate and it's causing you to suffer, is the only signal that one is exiting the preset script. It's the neurological equivalent of a catastrophic system failure that forces a manual reboot.
That's a compelling argument, but pain might be a powerful and often necessary catalyst for change. But to claim it is the only catalyst, doesn't that simplify the complex motivations for growth? What about just innate curiosity? What about the aesthetic drive to create something new?
Well, those drives the protocol suggests are only strong enough to overcome the DMN when they're coupled with significant risk or discomfort. In a world optimized for comfort, curiosity rarely translates into meaningful disruptive action unless there's an underlying dissatisfaction strong enough to warrant the energy expense.
I come at it from a different way then. The theory explicitly states that the libre albedrío is an illusion until the pattern is broken. So free will is contingent on an action if it's defined not as an inherent state, but as a potential capacity activated by breaking inertia. Then how can we be certain that this latent capacity wasn't always present,
And if it is always present, even if it's unused, then NPC isn't a definition of existence. It's a temporary state of deep inertia. To define a person by their deepest inertia is to deny their deepest potential.
I'm not denying potential. I'm defining the default state. The potential is purely theoretical until it's demonstrated. If 99% of people are demonstratively operating the script, it's irresponsible to ignore that reality just because the label is uncomfortable. The whole point of the NPC protocol is to give you the map to move from that pre-programmed state to the state of contingent free will. And the very nature of the solution protocol, it serves as empirical proof of the thesis. If agency were merely dormant, the solution wouldn't need to be so radical. To hack the matrix, one requires friction consciente, conscious friction, and this has to be pursued actively through the protocol of 3 steps. The sheer force required to break the DMN, that validates the claim that we are fundamentally programmed by comfort.
I find incredible value in the pragmatic steps, I really do. The theory's rigor shines, especially in the call for an information diet. The idea that if you're not producing, you're being programmed, that is a crucial insight into filtering the consumption loops that feed the DMN.
But that intellectual step is insufficient on its own. It has to be paired with physical discomfort and social risk. So the first step is the pattern switch: cold showers, new routes, dopamine fasts, doing something daily the algorithm cannot predict. It's a forced deviation designed to compel the brain to exit pilot mode. And the third step is muerte del ego, the willingness to be ridiculed for pursuing something real instead of social safety.
I acknowledge the effectiveness of that kind of jarring disruption. It forces a cognitive reset, certainly. However, I have to question the rigidity, the necessity of the physical pain aspects of the pattern switch. Is such an extreme introduction of friction truly the only method, or is it just the most efficient way to overcome a biological preference? I mean, why must it be physical pain or social ridicule? Couldn't high-level intellectual discipline, mastering a difficult language, for example, also generate sufficient metabolic friction?
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it underestimates the power of the DMN to absorb intellectual challenges into a new routine. A difficult language can become a comfortable, predictable study habit. Intellectual pursuits, they often lack the sharp, instantaneous metabolic shock that a cold shower provides, or the deep social vulnerability of muerte del ego. The system needs to crash, and comfort is the operating system.
The core disagreement then is whether the path to recovery must be punitive. If intellectual rigor and focused creation, the information diet, can slowly and deliberately chip away at the DMN's dominance, that confirms the inherent presence of agency, however deeply buried it is. Your position suggests that only a violent external shock can awaken the inner self, which reduces the individual to a victim of biology who has to be coerced into freedom.
The protocol argues that you must be coerced because mediocrity is contagious, and the algorithmic pull is profound. The NPCs hate the players precisely because they remind them of their own lack of freedom. This social friction, this willingness to be different, it's essential. Half measures will fail. You need a mechanism that forces the core programming to crash, and that is what conscious friction achieves.
I will concede that the force of the combined biological and social inertia is immense, and it requires radical action. But even if radical action is needed, the purpose of that action is to recover agency, which implies that the NPC label is descriptive of a functional state, a deep rut, and not a final ontological definition of the individual.
To summarize my position then, the material provides compelling, layered evidence across biology and social dynamics, the DMN, mimetic desire, the cheap dopamine loops, that overwhelmingly validates the severity of the NPC theory. The urgent reality is that one must introduce friction consciente to become the active director of one's life before realizing too late that one has simply lived the script written for somebody else. The stakes are existential.
And I maintain that while the analysis of modern human passivity is incisive and extremely valuable, the framework of NPC risks obscuring the nuances of biological efficiency and that latent human capacity for change. The theory successfully illuminates the powerful obstacles to agency, forcing us to ask whether our actions are genuine choices or mere reactions. But if the goal in the protocol is to activate the self, we have to consider that the self was never entirely absent, only deeply subdued.
It is a profound hypothesis. It challenges the fundamental assumptions we make about self-determination every single day.
Indeed, the NPC protocol raises necessary questions about free will and personal responsibility in the 21st century. So we'll leave it to the listener to engage with their own reality and to decide if they are merely rendering a life or if they are actively creating one.